Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 5, Episode 4, Nor the Battle to the Strong. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and X as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, and we'll probably say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we're great. We're awesome. I think we're a pretty great time. And of course, we just really enjoy deep diving into this 30-year-old show. And you'll probably love it too if you're a fan of Star Trek at all, and especially Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So join us. And if you don't like what we say, you can politely tell us, and we'll try to get back to you whenever we can. But yeah, tonight we are doing Northern Battle to the Strong. Odd title for what I feel like is a great episode. And yeah, I'm ready to dive into it. If you are, David, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Okay. Now, of course, before we do that, we always do have to, or not have to, but like to check in with one another, of course. So, really quick, how was your week been so far?
Week's been good. Last week I was telling you guys I was reading Red Rising. Finished it this week. It is fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Really am glad I read it. Again, my roommate was the one who's been reading. He had read it before. He's rereading the series and suggested I read it. I mentioned last week it's like if Harry Potter, Ender's Game, and The Hunger Games had a kid. Oh man, like it's so good. Like all of those combined, but like this is the older brother. Like this has more mature themes than those three series I just mentioned. Those are like young adult fiction. This
Okay.
is got more mature stuff. Not I'm not saying it's like X-rated. I'm just saying like it deals with some of those harder issues that those like the Hunger Games being for kids doesn't, delve into some of the dirty details of what's going on. This one is more willing to talk about that kind of stuff. Then I just finished yesterday this one. It's the House of Love and Death by Andrew Clavin. He's one of the guys on the Daily Wires podcast I like listening to. It's a mystery novel. It's good. I do have some things I would critique if I were to say anything more about it, but I'll just leave it that there. And then today, I finally started Napoleon, the biography of Napoleon that I got a couple months ago in preparation for the Ridley Scott movie coming out at the end of this month for Thanksgiving. Looking
So is
forward to
that the
that.
book? Is that the book they're using for the movie? Do you
I
know?
don't. I've never seen anything saying we were that they were using any particular book for the movie. I assume this book was probably referenced, but it doesn't sound like they are saying it was inspired by this biography. Um, but it's 800-page biography, so it's gonna be pretty in depth. But I imagine they're gonna start. They're gonna have to. And I don't know how long the movie will be, but they're gonna have to try and abridge a lot of his life. They can only get through so much. But after I finish that, which will take me about 2 weeks, I'm gonna read The Count of Monte Cristo. Which anyone who
Oh,
knows me and
yes.
Perry, I read The Count of Monte Cristo a long time ago as a kid. I read the abridged version. Perry read Count of Monte Cristo a couple of years ago. I think was it during the pandemic you
So
read
the
it?
first time I read it was in high school, and then during year two of our COVID shutdown, I read it again,
Right.
and such a great book. And then I watched the movie, of course,
Yeah.
because how can you not?
Yeah.
Such a great book, such a great movie. I kind of went a little, Alexander Dumas crazy there for a minute because I was reading a bunch of his stuff
Yeah.
and researching all the little like places from the book and stuff just to see like what inspired the tale and everything because there's a lot of history that goes into the fiction that he creates in
Right.
that story. So you can find a
Yes.
lot of those places or indirect, the inspirations for them anyway. You can find them and view them and stuff like that. So that's
Right.
very that just kind of enhanced the story for me. So yeah, but that's one of my favorite stories of all time, without a
Yeah.
doubt, is
100%.
the Count of Monte Cristo. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, you really should, especially if you're a fan of the movie. Because while the movie is great, there is a lot in the book that they can't cover. I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
and it's great. Yeah.
It
What do
would
you
make
what do you
a
think of
great
it? Yeah.
TV show. It would make a great
Oh,
TV show.
absolutely.
Especially
That should
for
be a
one
TV
one
show.
prison TV show. I mean, it's obviously big enough, but I mean, the first episode is that first bit explaining his life, and then the betrayal, and then you give us 2 or 3 episodes of him in the prison and him getting to
I mean,
escape.
I would break it up by season. Like season 1 is his life before prison, and we're seeing the mounting jealousy of
Of yeah,
Mondego, and just and seeing all the key players sort of get trotted out and they're around, and then season 2 and maybe season 3
prison.
the would be prison. Yeah, and seriously, like I wanted to just hardcore, like because I mean, if you obviously you've read the book, you know that like the first part of his prison
Oh
sentence,
yeah,
there's nothing. Like he's
he's
completely,
isolated
yeah. So I
for
would
like
love
two,
to.
3 years, right? Like
Yeah,
he's yeah,
yeah. He's isolated. Yeah, I think it is like 3 years. He is completely isolated and he's tortured. And then he finally meets, and that would be season 3 for me, is when he meets his first and only friend, and then starts that
right.
educational process, which then
And
would
I
end the
forget that
season.
character's name, but he pops up into his cell because he's been digging his way out, and he's like,
Yes,
"Oh,
he's
I
been
didn't go
digging a
far enough."
tunnel. Right. I've been digging a tunnel. And so that would be all
Yeah,
of season 3 would be their meeting and digging and learning and all of that stuff. And then season 4 would end with that man's death and the escape and him being thrown,
yeah.
thrown clear.
Oh, they think he's a dead body.
Right.
His friend's dead body.
And
Yeah.
then season
Ah, man,
4,
I remember it. I remember
yeah,
it.
right. And then season 4 would open
Yeah.
up with him, swimming, swimming ashore and being found by the pirates. And then we
Yeah.
get his whole, that could be season 4 would be his life as a pirate, because he lived as a pirate for a little bit before he
Yeah.
finally earned the right to make his path to leave them and do.
Yes.
So that would be, I mean, seriously, that's how I'd break that up 100%. We'd get like 7, 8 seasons out of this show doing it my way, and just
Yeah,
very
man, you're
detail
taking the long way
oriented. I
around. Yeah.
because I want it to be good. Like, don't tell me you're gonna do this and then like,
Well, okay, let me say this though, because I feel like your way, while I love it, is also kind of it's slow to get to the Count of Monte Cristo part,
yeah,
right?
that's yeah.
So what I would do if I were doing it your way of like telling us the story of prison and the escape is I would cut it between the fast forward to when he's the Count.
Mm,
He's all regaled up,
uh-huh.
he's all looking fine, and then
See,
flashbacks, always doing
I knew you were gonna
flashbacks,
say that,
flashbacks.
and that's what I was trying to avoid. I hate flashbacks. I'm
Well,
sorry,
okay, maybe
guys.
not
I hate
flashbacks, but like we're doing the two timelines.
I know,
That's how I would.
but see, I hate those because in every show where I've seen them, when they do those little flashback clips or whatever, they're so action packed and exciting, and they're wonderful, and you always want more of those, and then they never
Well,
have
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
But then they do something stupid later on, like when the show ends, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna do a prequel show that's all about us." It's like, no, give it to me all together.
Now,
Give all,
yeah, 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 yeah.
that's what I want.
Well,
Like I want the
well, don't
full
get me
thing.
wrong. I'm saying like 50%, in the prison, and 50% as the Count, 50-50. I'm not
Okay.
saying we do flashbacks like you think of flashbacks where it's like a quick blip. I'm talking about, yeah, we take our time in the prison, we learn stuff. The storyline is very 50-50. If I was doing it that way, otherwise, I think 3 seasons in the prison might be a bit much, but I get your point.
Well, one season, not 1 to 2 seasons of prison, but I could see them doing like maybe just well, and the reason why I say 2 seasons is because as we've discussed many times, now seasons are so much shorter, so I feel like you would need 2 seasons to make sure you get the right amount of time for everything. But if
Right.
if if that hadn't been an issue, then yeah, 1 season would be
Well,
fine.
hold on. Are we talking 10 episode seasons? We talking 24 episode
No, I'm talking
seasons?
10
Sounds like
episode
you're talking.
seasons. Yeah, I'm talking
Okay.
I'm
All
thinking of
right.
it
All
based
right. Okay.
on today and the way we
Modern.
film stuff. So
Okay.
yeah, 10 episode
Okay. Okay.
seasons,
All
that's
right.
why I was doing it my way. No, if we were doing it
Okay.
old
All right.
school
All right.
20, 26 episodes a season, then yeah, only
Right.
one. One is more than enough. And I would definitely
Yeah,
want
we
to
would be
break
done.
that up. Like season 2, half of season
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be this, the other half would be
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Mid-season finale.
Yeah.
Yeah. All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
But no,
yeah.
we
So
we
anyway.
really need to not speak this too much into existence, because I feel like somebody will hear us, and then we'll get some awful, knockoff version where he's in prison and is, I don't know, secretly in love with a warden or some nonsense that they'll
Oh
do.
gosh, please no.
Yeah, so
Oh,
no,
you're making me anxious over here.
I'm just saying, that's what will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are not here to talk about literally any of that. That was not the
Yeah.
point at all. We got way off on a great tangent, but still a tangent nonetheless. So, since I gave the recap for last week's episode, would you like to do this week's?
I could do this week's. All right, guys. So again, this episode is called "Nor the Battle to the Strong," which, for a quick reference, that is a reference to Ecclesiastes 9:11, according to Wikipedia, which reads in full: "I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but time and chance happen to them all." So that's the verse that is referenced. All right. So this episode is focused primarily on Jake. Jake is following Dr. Bashir around because he's going to write an article about Bashir. This is kind of his first job as a writer. Now, Jake normally writes fiction, but he's trying to find some way to use his writing skill to make some money. Unfortunately, Dr. Bashir is loves talking about medical stuff, and Jake unfortunately can't follow any of it because it's way over his head. These terminologies, it's just too much. But while he and Bashir are on a runabout coming back from a conference, they receive a distress signal from a Federation colony that's being attacked by Klingons, and they're asking for medical help. So Jake says that I'm willing to go, Dr. Bashir. I've been in situations on the station. I can handle it. Uh, don't go, but don't stop on my behalf. And so Dr. Bashir and Jake go to this colony. Now there's supposed to be a ceasefire going on, everyone might remember, but unfortunately the Klingons have decided to break that ceasefire, at least on this planet. So while Jake is with Dr. Bashir on this planet in the emergency room, it's pretty dire. They're low on supplies, they're low on personnel. The Starfleet troops have been decimated. And in fact, one of the ships that was sent to try and bring relief is destroyed by the Klingons before they can get any help. So they are left alone and pretty well abandoned. So Cisco and the others on the station hear about this, and so Cisco is worried. And when he hears about the Starfleet ship being destroyed, he gets Dax and some of the others to join him on Defiant to make a run to try and get to the colony and save Jake, Bashir, and the colonists. In the meantime, Dr. Bashir is doing his doctorly duties and is helping save lives. But Jake, who is, again, the person we're mainly following, is really starting to realize the full danger of the situation. He is helping with the wounded. He's trying to help get them, move them around. He's carrying stretchers with another guy. He meets a Starfleet soldier who has in an attempt to get out of the battle, has shot his own leg and wounded himself in order to be removed from the battle. It's obvious what he did, and so this soldier feels shame for himself. Jake feels shame for him. It's very unpleasant to have to try and realize that this man's a coward. When Dr. Bashir and the others need a generator because the main generator is knocked out, they say, "Well, there's one on the runabout." So Jake and Dr. Bashir go to get the generator from the runabout. But when they come under a bombardment, Jake is terrified and abandons Bashir and tries to run for cover. He finds a wounded Starfleet soldier who's dying, um, and Jake just feels terrible because he can't help this dying man. He abandoned Bashir. He feels like a coward. When he finally comes back to the hospital, Bashir has already returned, having carried the generator all by himself, but was injured in the process. He thought Jake was dead, and Jake doesn't want to admit that he ran away and was scared of the situation. Uh, so when they need to abandon this underground hospital, everyone has to try and leave, and Jake is paralyzed by fear and cowardice. He can't even help anyone anymore. So he's one of the last ones to leave the hospital, and the two soldiers that were trying to protect people are killed when two Klingons rush in. And Jake grabs one of the guns and starts firing wildly, and it causes a cave in, which ultimately saves everyone by keeping the Klingons either killing them off screen or keeping them from getting to anybody. Jake is knocked unconscious by this, and he wakes up with Bashir and his father uh, praising him for his bravery, and they bring him back to the station. But when they get back to the station, Jake writes I would assume it's the article about Dr. Bashir, but it's more about his experience as someone who experienced the trauma of war, and he basically admits to what it was like to be a coward and feel fear and cowardice in the midst of a war situation. Um, and yeah, his father praises him for his honesty. People don't like to admit when they're scared and afraid, but he's willing to look inside himself and do that. And yeah, that's the episode. I missed anything there, Perry? Oh, are you muted?
I'm sorry, was nothing working? Technical difficulties. We're live here, so whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I'd say that you hit the details that we
Yeah.
needed here. Plus, we're going to go into a lot of stuff. The only thing I would say would be, well, you were saying that Jake initially when he was listening to Bashir go on, that he didn't really know what the doctor was talking about. I would say it was more like he didn't care. As we're watching the episode, we're hearing more of an internal monologue of Jake, and
Hmm.
what Jake is wanting is this is his first writing assignment. This is him moving from story writer to journalist, and on his first assignment, he's wanting action. He wants drama. He wants to struggle for good and evil. Not some boring medical conference where even in attendance at the conference, he couldn't tell that anything had really happened. Whereas Bashir is going on and on about how his paper ruffled so many feathers and
Hmm.
it caused such a upset with people. And so, yeah, you have this, this very young, eager, naive person who is just chomping at the bit for action and just totally, oblivious to what is going on around him. And I feel like that's kind of the essence of this episode is that Jake has such a very naive outlook on Starfleet and what it means to be a Starfleet officer and to be an enlisted person with Starfleet. And
Hmm.
he's always sheltered and protected by his father. And even to the point where he invokes his family name to make Cisco, or not to make Cisco, but to make
Bashir.
Bashir
Hmm.
take him into this battle situation. And
Right.
he says, "I'm a Cisco, I can handle it." That has nothing to do with anything of who you are.
Right.
And that's what this episode later goes on to show us, that he may
Right.
carry a proud family name, but he is not his father.
Right.
So, and that's also why I really love again, interesting title. I love this title for this episode because I mean it's essentially, about how uh you know people experience moments of personal failure, and then you see them trying to make sense of it later, and we see that through the guy who shoots himself in the foot. We see that in Jake when he runs away and leaves Bashir, and then he finds the other soldier and he's trying to justify why he left Bashir and that it was maybe destiny that he find this guy who eventually dies. Like there's a lot of that that's going on in this episode, and I feel like it's just a really nice gritty turn away from the easily solved, pristine world of Trek that we had known before this.
Right.
We'd seen a lot of battles and stuff like that, but they were always very clean. In this episode, where Jake's getting blood on his clothes within 5 minutes of them getting into this encampment here. And they're filthy, and the doctors are sweaty and covered in grime and all this. We haven't really seen a whole lot of that in Trek at all, let alone Deep Space Nine. So I really loved how they just went and leaned into this dark portrayal here of war in the future.
Hmm. Yeah. This some ways feels like a contemporary episode with the one which I'm gonna try and find here real quick from last season near the end, which was about Bashir going to that planet and helping
The
the
blight.
deceased people, the blight. Yeah, I'm trying to find the episode real quick so I can say what it is. The quickening. That's right.
Hmm.
And in that one, we got Dr. Bashir's perspective of not every disease is so easily solved. Star Trek can definitely at times be a bit hand wavy about how they solve issues.
Hmm.
So that one, there was not a hand wavy episode. Bashir was not initially successful. He does lose patience. He loses someone he's close to in that episode. This one's similar. Jake is Ben, yeah, he's been in battles before. The station's come under attack. I mean, the whole Klingon fleet once tried to attack, and he was fine. So he's seen Klingons before, and this is the first time he's ever had to directly confront it and do something about it, absent his own father, which is very important. It's
Yes.
easy when dad's gotten he's taking on all the risk, he's taking all the stress. Dad will take care of it. This is the first time he's ever had to do it himself, outside his own dad's immediate supervision.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a very serious episode, and really brings a lot of that trauma forward. So yeah, it's an important episode for that reason. It's not just a quick, easy, fun episode.
And it's an interesting way to develop the Cisco family dynamic as well. Everything that we had seen with the Ciscos beforehand, we knew that they were obviously a very tender and caring family, especially with each other. But we also were seeing, Jake growing up. Jake is maturing, and now here he is, officially into adulthood. I mean, you can say whatever you want to about the future, but it's clear here that they were marking on purpose that he was 18 years old. They say it twice within a
Hmm.
span of a couple of minutes. Jake is 18. Jake is an adult. Jake is, by all rights and standards that we can tell, a man. He is able to make these decisions on his own. But then we see him doing things that, we would like to think initially is out of character for Jake. But then you have to realize Jake doesn't have the kind of training and upbringing that others in Starfleet would have had.
Right.
The quickest comparison that we could make for Jake here would be Wesley Crusher, who,
Yes.
lost his father at a very young age and then still living with his mother who never left Starfleet and she never stopped serving aboard starships. As Wesley continued his development on starships and under the tutelage of not just his mother, but then other senior officers who kind of took him under his wing, Picard, Riker, Deanna, so forth and so on. Jake doesn't have any of that. We see that, after the loss of the Saratoga and his mother, Cisco went back to Earth. He was working at the Utopia Planitia shipyards. Most
Right.
likely, Jake was splitting time between his house with his father and then his house with his grandfather whenever Ben had to go and work, up in space wherever. But
Mhm.
they weren't on a ship. And so now this is the first time that they're, out on the station and so forth. So a lot of his formative years have been very much under the sheltered and supervised care of his father. And
Right.
now he's really starting to branch out and being able to do things on his own and without his father. And we see how that is affecting both of them. Jake
Mhm.
not sure of the next steps he wants to take, and Ben not sure how he can let go of kind of the promise he made of always taking care of his son. He even says in the episode, I made a promise to make sure nothing bad would happen to this child, and now he's far away. He's separated by days of travel, and
Mhm.
he can't do anything. So yeah, I really liked this episode and how they developed that particular relationship. And then there's also the little bits and pieces that we see of the rest of the crew that are around, which add a nice little family development, uh, bits to the story too. So yeah, I really do like this episode, and I like it more now than I did when I watched it probably 15, 20, 25 years ago,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
So what would
Yeah.
you say, again, first time viewer, never seen the episode before, what would you say would be the standout thing for you that just kind of makes this a great episode?
Well, I do want to back up and say I don't think it's not my favorite episode.
Well,
For the
I was
sim.
gonna go the other way later on. Okay, what do you think makes it a
Oh,
not so great episode? But
oh,
I
okay.
didn't
Well,
tell
I'm
you
gonna
that.
beat you
I
there.
didn't tell you that. Yeah. All right,
I'm
fine.
gonna beat you
Give me the bad first.
there. Okay. All
Go
right. All
ahead.
right. You know what? I don't want to say just because I want to make sure I say it clearly, and then we can enjoy the episode for what it's worth. For me, I'll have a bit of a hard time in this episode, or at least I did watching it. I feel like Jake's writing, he's doing kind of a voiceover. It starts off as we're hearing what he's thinking, and then basically by the end, it's turning out this is like the article he's written about the situation. And
Right.
unfortunately, as someone who, again, I my degrees in English. I'm not saying I'm a great writer, but there were times when this character, who's supposed to be a good writer, this is what he does. I felt it was really melodramatic. And don't get me wrong, this is a serious situation. But there were times when I was just like, is this really how someone would have written like this? I mean, it felt
Well,
like he's an 18-year-old kid writing about it. And
I was gonna
so
say, well, then in that case, wouldn't you say that then he succeeded? He did his job because he is 18, and him writing about something that is, very complex and also a first time experience and trying to get all of that out. I felt like he did a great job. What, because like you said, when we got to the end and realized that what we had just watched was in the general narration was the actual article that he wrote, I feel like he did a great job portraying this first time experience for a young man who was out of his element, completely out of his element.
So I would put it this way. All of that would be more true for me if by the end of the episode, he didn't get quite so much a pat on the head from Cisco, because I feel like here's what I want from characters. I want characters who experience traumatic situations to grieve that trauma. I don't feel like Jake really grieved it fully. Yes, he is doing an article, he's expressing it, and by the time the episode ends, that's all you have time for. The episode's got to end. So again, I'm going to give the show a pass. I'm not saying it's a bad episode. I'm just saying I was distracted by what I felt like was a bit of melodrama. I wish that we had had a moment where Jake could have Jake never apologized to Bashir, for example, of I
Yeah,
feel like I abandoned you and I'm sorry I abandoned you. And Bashir being like, no, you were afraid. You didn't know where to go. You needed to get to safety.
yeah.
In that moment, it wasn't about the generator. It was about being safe, and you didn't know where you were, so it makes sense you were lost. And I was able to get the generator. Like I want that scene. I want that scene where Jake's like is teary and he's having to like express his shame.
I, I
Because like
will I will agree with you absolutely on that because when we see when at the end when we see that they're reading the article and we see Bashir is reading it as well, I would have loved for the whole episode to end with the two Cisco's in their home talking about it and everything like that, and then the door chimes and it's Bashir who comes
right,
in and he has just finished reading it as well, and he
right,
does give us that bit of closure, being like,
yes,
I just read this,
yes,
and kind of gives him his own little last 5 minutes of closure to wrap it up. Because I mean, the
yes,
episode starts with
yes,
Jake and Bashir. I feel like it should have ended also with Jake and
yes,
Bashir, and
yes,
Cisco still being there to kind of look on and give the fatherly, I'm proud of you for acknowledging your faults, acknowledging your failure, being honest about it with yourself, and then allowing others to read it and so forth. All of that I felt like was
right,
great. I loved it. But at the same time, I do feel like we should have got a little bit more in a sense of closure between Jake
yes,
and Bashir, because
yes,
there was some tension in their relationship. There needed to be
right,
some resolution to that. And
right,
yeah, Bashir walking in and being like, I just read this and
right,
I don't want you to feel sorry. I don't want you to feel ashamed. You're still a young man. Like giving him that as well, that would have been great. You're right. You're
yes.
absolutely right on that.
Yes, and I also, just to back that up, I also wish, and this is again a hard thing, it's a montage scene in my head of people reading Jake's article and that
Other
being the
people.
trigger of his career. Jake's first article is a little hit. It gets out there, it gets his name out there, and
Yeah,
people
other
are
people
reading it.
reading it, like, you
Yeah.
they do a montage, and you see Quark in his bar leaned over reading it, and you see Worf on the Defiant reading it, and you see maybe, um, the O'Briens, all of them are sitting in the living room,
Well,
each
I'm
of them with
talking
their
about like
own.
random people too.
Oh,
I'm
I
talking
mean, those
about,
2, but I'm just
yeah,
saying, like, it would have been I think it would I agree with you, I'm just saying I would have liked to see that too, like, as they're doing those final logs, and I mean, they did a little bit of that, we see Bashir reading it and so forth, but extend that montage a bit and show
right.
us others also reading it or discussing it or something like that, passing the pad along so someone else can read it, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would have been interesting.
Yeah,
Would
I
have been a
that's
nice
what I'm
touch.
as we've just been saying, I wish this episode had a little better closure. I'm okay with Jake having traumatic moments, like he's hiding under a table at the last moment. I'm gonna put it very directly because it's basically what I'm trying to get at. Unfortunately, Sirach Lofton as Jake, his acting for me was just a little bit not there. And I'm
No,
not saying I'm any better. It was a really hard part to play this episode,
yeah,
and he did a great job in a lot of moments. But this episode was asking a lot of an actor who's not part of our main cast. He was
and we
cast as a
and we
child.
don't right, and we don't get
Yeah.
to see that often. He was cast as a child. He's most likely having to like go to school and stuff like that, so he's
Yes.
not totally immersed in the element on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, I think that Sirach Lofton was a little bit older here. He's not actually 18. I think he
In
was a
real
little bit
life.
older. And, while older, more experienced actors can kind of de-age themselves a little bit to play roles,
Right.
because they have the experience and so forth. I don't think that he totally had that same experience. So
Right.
trying to play this more unsure young man who's having to make decisions for the first time
Right.
by himself
Right.
may have been a little bit more difficult because he was already doing that,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. So I just want to summarize this because I do want to get onto the good parts of the episode. But for me, the reason I was having some trouble watching this episode is because Sirach Lofton as an actor, again, I'm not trying to say he's bad at it. I'm just saying that it was a lot of this was a very serious episode and a lot was put on him. And unfortunately, I don't think he as an actor was quite up to the task of it. Again, I'm not saying he's bad or I want him gone or I didn't like the episode. I'm just saying there were moments where it felt like this needed someone who could really grab the part and really go for it. But
Mhm,
again, I don't want to bash it anyway. And then sometimes a bit melodramatic in the way that the writing was done. This is supposed to be his words, but it's just the writers of the show putting words in his mouth. And part of me felt like they could have tightened up some of that dialogue a bit. And then yes, if all of that could have been just bing bong boom, if we could have really had a really solid, a little bit better tie-in at the end, wrapping it all up. But that's all the negative I had to say. Everything else was great. We have the young kid who's basically working alongside Jake, and he starts joking about death. Very um,
yeah, they're
morose
very mhm, all
conversation.
of the doctors and nurses that were there, they were all very, very, fatalistic, I would say. I was gonna say
Yes,
nihilistic, but it's more of a fatalism, sitting there
yes.
casually discussing, the
What's
best
the
way
best
to
way to die?
die, what would feel the best or be the most or the least traumatic,
Yeah,
getting
least painful.
decapitated, being vaporized, so
Yeah.
forth and so on, and I I I I thought that that was, like, interesting to add
Mhm.
because I've heard of that. I haven't actually seen it, but I've heard of that from, them saying that, doctors who in particular specialize in, like, ER and trauma and also work in, like, war-torn areas and stuff like that become so desensitized to what's going on around them that they can make these very, cavalier statements, and even to the point where it's not just that they say it and it doesn't bother them, but they say them and they laugh, like they find some
Mhm.
of it funny, So I thought that was interesting that they included that here
Mhm.
in a Trek show, but it was like, why not? Like everybody has different ways of coping with such, trauma and stuff, and that's exactly what this is.
Right.
It's these people who have been in this, prolonged battle situation, and they're needing a way to, release the pressure and maintain their focus, and that's what this was.
Right. Yeah. That reminds me because the character we haven't talked about yet much is the guy who shot himself to get out of the battle.
Oh, we were gonna
Um,
get there.
okay. Well, I guess I'm rushing there because
No, that's
what
all
I'm
right. Go
getting
ahead. Go ahead.
what I again for everyone, I've talked about this before, but what I like doing with stories is I like trying to think how could I have done it differently and improved it in my own estimation. Um, I wish the guy who shot himself in the leg never admitted it because there is the second scene which I didn't mention in my recap where Jake, who is feeling shame for having abandoned Bashir, goes to him and he's laying on a bed and he's like, everyone keeps looking at me like they think I'm taking up space, and you're the only one who seems to understand my situation. I was so good in the battle simulations, and no one knows what it's like until you're actually in the battle. That's all true and fine, but what I wish the character had done was still try and maintain I didn't shoot myself. I wished he
Okay.
had been lying because the whole point if Jake is going to be honest about his experience at the end of the episode, it'd be better to contrast him with someone who was trying to lie to himself the whole time and never would admit it. If this character who had shot himself kept insisting, no, 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 it wasn't a phaser. That's not me who shot myself. No, 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 no. I'm a brave soul, and I fought them off, and like he's blustering and all of this nonsense. And then we contrast it with Jake, who's like, no, I'm not. I don't want to be like that. Um, I wish that's what the character. I wish that was how that was written, because instead the character gets all fatalistic, as you were also like he's also fatalistic like the others, because he's like, I no one will ever trust me again. I can only go work on a working ship.
Yeah,
Um,
he's completely given up on himself, and even Jake says,
yeah,
"Well, they're you might get a court martial, but they might also stick you in counseling and do rehab,
yeah, that's
and
right.
then
That's exactly what he says. Yep.
all that kind of stuff." He's like, "Nah, no one will ever trust." And the guy says, "It like no one will ever trust me again.
Right.
Counseling's not going to make anybody trust me ever again.
Right.
All I can do is, take the court martial, resign my commission, and
Right.
go work as a miner."
Right.
Like his bright prospects as a proud Starfleet officer all gone up with one shot,
Right.
and he's just completely down on himself,
Right.
and he talks about how Jake is the only one who doesn't look at him the same way as the rest of them. But initially Jake did, because when they first brought him in, and Bashir is going over his wound, and they realize it's a phaser burn, and that means it only could have come from him.
Hmm.
Um, Jake is just appalled at the thought that
Yes.
this guy could have done what he did, and
Right.
it's not until after his his own brush with cowardice and so forth that he kind
Yeah.
of changes his opinion on the guy. But I mean, initially they were all on the same page here. This guy was
Right.
a coward, he was a
Right.
failure, and they didn't want to have anything to do with him.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah, it's and I want to be very clear, because while I had some negative things to say, the episode overall is good and it has something to say that's
yeah,
important. And it's like the beginning of the episode where Jake, in his wish to have something more dramatic to write, he admonishes himself in his own head. He's like, I'm actually wishing for a disease so Dr. Bashir can go
just so
treat
that my
people.
right, just so that my story will be better. I'm wishing ill on
Other
others.
people. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's great. It's a great little self-reflective moment. It's funny. It's exactly what happens. I mean, literally 2 seconds later, they're getting a distress call, um, and I'm glad for Jake that he gets this moment to grow and mature.
yeah,
That we if he's going to be, for example, a wartime journalist.
correspondent. Yeah.
Yeah, those are important roles for people to be willing to tell those hard hitting stories of people in dangerous situations. And this episode reminded me of the book I just read last week. It was one of the short books I read. It was Hiroshima. It was about the aftermath of the Hiroshima atomic bombings, and that's a hugely traumatic situation for the people who were hit by the bomb, and the people who had, like, some people were still able to move around and walk and help people, but as anyone knows, like, over time, they were affected by the nuclear radiation, and so their lives were still negatively affected, even if they initially came off unscathed. And um, it focuses on six people, and how their lives were affected and changed by the incident. It was written over the course of several decades, and their lives, what happened to them over their lives. And yeah, it just makes you, whenever you read stuff like that or you watch an episode like this, it makes you remember, war is not a pleasant thing. It's not something to be wished for. It's not something to be
I
championed.
I
You
seriously
don't.
thought you were gonna say war is hell. Like
Yeah,
I
well, war
thought you
is
were gonna
hell.
yeah.
Well, I don't want to do too cliched.
Yeah, I just thought it was coming. I was
Yeah,
kind of prepared.
yeah, yeah,
But no, you're right, and I mean, and that's one of the things that Deep Space Nine gets criticized a lot, for how it's not the next generation. But obviously it's not. But they're able to do things like this, giving us this very bloody, up close and personal view of a skirmish that is, even as Jake says, probably no one's going to remember later on in this war, in this overall conflict. No one's going to remember Agilon Prime, but it's still moments like that that are defining moments for countless people, not just our main cast here. And to see the way
right,
that they handle it here, and it's not it's not that somebody was a clear hero with victory hero music behind them you know, or giving an impassioned speech, which makes the enemy lay down their arms and all that kind of stuff, which we used to get in the 60s Trek and, Next Generation and so forth. Right before tensions truly flared and weapons were fired, Picard giving one of those famous speeches with that British panache, and everybody just lays down their arms and bows their head at the, shiny bald man. We actually get some grit here. We get to see some
Yeah.
some struggle, some substance, and
Yeah.
I really like that. I mean, as we're moving into the progression of TV shows from the 60s to 80s and 90s and so forth, being able to actually tell realistic shows. I'm not gonna say it's necessarily harder, but it's like we have to make sure that we're doing it with a certain level of accuracy. And even with sci-fi shows, in trying to deliver a message and not a message that is necessarily coming down on one side or the other, whether that, with a political affiliation, a religious affiliation, which kind of seems like where we are with a lot of things these days. To have a show like Star Trek do an episode that's like, look, we're not talking about any of that. What we're talking about here is the actual just struggle of getting through war, of getting
Right.
through a conflict. What's that
Right.
like? We don't care whose side you're on.
Right.
Everybody is struggling. Everybody is a loser here because this is your fallout, no matter
Right.
what side you're on. So
Yeah.
I really like that. I really like that they do that here, and we just don't really see that in a lot of TV shows, and especially not in sci-fi.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This is why Deep Space Nine is one of my favorites, or it's the one that I come back to the
The
most.
most.
Enterprise tries. It did try to do a lot of that, especially in the latter seasons before it abruptly went off the air. In my opinion, had so much potential, but I think that kind of like the way we were describing our Count of Monte Cristo show, um, does the build up to a lot of the actual dealing with the conflict, dealing with the issues, and that was a bit too slow. And by the time they actually got there and really pouring it on and firing on all cylinders here and giving us great storyline after great storyline, it was too little too late. There were so many other issues with from the network that was on it to casting and so forth and so on. It died. But yeah, if we could get a show that could do more of this, I think it'd be a success, and I would love to see like them continue some of these Deep Space Nine storylines, and give us more of that.
Yeah.
Now, so before I was going to say turn to our B plot, but then in thinking about it, we don't really have a B plot in this episode. We've got I was calling them like vignettes basically. We get where
Yeah.
Cisco is, he checks in with Odo, who has
Mhm.
an unfortunate accident when he's chasing down some criminals. We get Quark trying to make decaffeinated Ractigino for Kira so she can drink it while she's pregnant. And then we have Cisco himself, who is struggling with trying to uh, keep worry at bay about
Right.
his son.
Yeah.
So
Dax has a great moment in that
yes,
scene. You wanna
once
you should say it.
again,
Yeah.
we get some more Jadzia here. So Jadzia is actually involved in two of those three scenes that we just described.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah,
we're
of
getting
course.
get some more Dax interplay here. So
Yeah.
the one with her and Cisco is they're on the Defiant after they've decided to go to rescue Jake and Bashir, and she is looking for Ben, and she finds him in a crawl space down in the engineering where he was working on the replicators, if I remember correctly. He was like tweaking
Yes.
the replicator. And so
Yeah.
then, she's talking to him and he's telling her, yeah, because I'm basically, he's telling her, I'm just trying to keep myself busy while we're making our way there. And so she starts to tell him about a story from when, one of her past selves had a child who had been sick and
Right.
was in the hospital, and how she was, so filled with worry and so forth, she never left the bedside of the child, and
Right.
she read all these books to the child and all this stuff. And I mean, oh, we did hear that the kid lived. And
Yes.
that's what Cisco's saying. He was like, what happened at the end? He's like, oh yeah, she pulled through. He's like, I'm glad you told me that because I was going to be very mad at you if you'd given me a sad story.
Yes.
But
And
she
then
does.
follows up with
Oh, yeah, well, there was more, and then
Yeah.
they didn't talk for 8 years, and he's like, "Yeah, save that for another time, like, I don't wanna hear it." So, great comedic moment between the 2 of them, also highlighting their particular relationship, but also just great stuff from Terry Farrell, being able to
Yes.
relate a story so succinctly, and, she got, emotional with it, and she's even saying,
Yes.
"It was 100 years ago,
Right.
and I'm still, I can still remember how helpless I felt and how
Yes.
powerless I felt and
Yes.
just all but she delivers it so well. Like they
Yes.
just Dax again from last week to now, Dax is a great character, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that we are finally getting more things that showcase that she is a great character.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah, Terry Farrell kills that scene. Like she definitely gets emotional. She gets the teary eyes. She gets the like she's experiencing like the memory and the trauma of it all over again.
like it
Great
happened a couple
scene.
of weeks ago. She's
Yeah,
experiencing it like it happened a couple of weeks ago, and she's even saying, "Yeah, it was 100 years ago, and I'm
right.
still, this."
And it's a great
So
story too because you're like, wait, does it have a bad ending? The kid never wakes up.
yeah, yeah,
You're
because
like,
she tells us
you're
so
with
well, and you're
sis.
like,
Yeah, you're
right,
with Cisco. You're like, hey, hold on now. You gotta
you
don't
gotta,
leave us hanging.
right. As I
Um,
like to say, don't walk me up the cliff. Walk me back down. Like what happened?
exactly.
De-escalate,
Yeah.
de-escalate.
Yeah, it's a great scene. And then they joke about, okay, well, let's go fix the sonic showers and find something else to keep ourselves busy.
And I like
Yeah,
that for Cisco too. It's just like, they always try to make it seem like the captains just, know everything. And it's not that he doesn't know his ship, but like what's he working on? Like everybody else has these obviously high tech positions and stations and so forth. And what's he doing? He's puttering around with the replicators. He's messing with the sonic showers, not critical systems. He's not, trying to reroute the transporters or, soup up the engines or anything like that, but he can tinker and putter around and so forth. And it does kind of let us harken back to his days at the Utopia Police shipyards. He was a shipbuilder.
right.
And so yeah, it's like I like seeing that they keep that kind of thing consistent with the characters. And we've seen him build things before. We saw him build that Bajoran light ship.
Yep.
We saw him he built a
Sailing.
clock
Yeah.
at one point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's right. The clock.
I
I
mean,
forgot about the clock. That's season
I
one,
didn't.
bro.
Yeah, I didn't forget. The things from this show that I want is basically what that should be called, like a whole subcategory of props that I would love to have if I could ever
Season
get my
one
hand on.
suit, season two suit, season three suit. Yeah.
Hmm
Yeah.
Kira's Durania, the thing that she was using to mourn the loss of Vedic Barile, I would love to have that giant fire pit looking thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Surprised you
got a
don't
lot of.
have a. I don't. You don't have an earring. You don't have
No, because even
it'd
if
be
I
hard to
got one
wear in
just
public.
I was gonna say, even if I got one to say, "Hey, I have a Bajoran earring," the temptation to wear it would
Right.
be far too strong, and then I don't think I could pull that off. I just no.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah,
hard. You'd have to
yeah.
be like in a group, and even then, you'd still have to like explain it to every other person you met. Like, what are you doing?
Unless you were, like, at a Star Trek convention, then no one would
Right.
question it. Everyone would
That's
know,
true. Yeah.
but, yeah, the moment you stepped outside of the convention, people would be looking at you. What's up? Why you got that on? What's happening?"
Yeah.
So,
Turns out I'm part of the Secret Service, and this is just a hidden ear device, as far as you
there you
know.
go.
Yeah.
These are the new earwigs. Isn't it
Yeah.
pretty? So,
It's not conspicuous at all.
mm, mm. And then of course we have our other scene where they're all in ops. Everybody except for Cisco is in ops, and they are giving pregnant Kira the quark to Gino, as it was called, which apparently tastes awful.
Right.
Who knew that just removing caffeine from something would make it taste so bad?
Yeah.
So
I'm curious about that. I wouldn't think caffeine really adds flavor to anything. I mean, maybe it does. Who do I know? What do I know? But
yeah,
I don't.
I assumed that it was the way he does it. He, changing the chemical composition of the
Right.
drink is what made it taste bad, not
Maybe
just the
that's right.
removal of caffeine.
Yeah. Like if they have the basic elements and you combine them into stuff, you have to remove certain basic elements. But if you remove too much of that, then like the sugar is affected or the coffee
Hmm
bean part is affected. That makes sense.
hmm
I was like, I don't know why it would be so much of a problem, but yeah, okay, maybe it makes sense. But that's not the funny part of the scene, though.
No, it is not. The funny part
No.
is that they're all sitting there discussing the reason for the Ractigino, which is
Yes,
that Miles is concerned that she drinks too many of them and that
yes.
the baby is going to be born with a caffeine addiction because Kira drinks so much she drinks so much Ractigino. And so
Right.
on the one side you've got Kira and Dax who are like, one, I don't drink that many, and two, it's her body. She can do whatever she wants. She can drink whatever she wants, whatever. And then on the other side is literally all the
All the
guys,
men, all the
all the
men.
men
Yeah, yeah.
are on the other
Two
side, and
women,
he's
four
like,
men. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, nah. It
And Worf, I love Worf. Well, he is the father, so he does have right to some input.
right.
It's
He's like,
like,
yeah, he's like, he should have some say, is what he says. But
yeah,
Quark
yeah,
absolutely seals it when he was
yes,
like, the less E, and they're like, less E, and he's like, yeah, on Ferenginar, it's considered a pregnancy is considered a rental.
rental.
And I was like, it just blew my mind when he said it. I was like, how, I mean, it was funny, but then I was like, how could it possibly be a rental? Does that mean that when the baby is born, so the baby is already in debt and has
Yes,
to like
that's
work
exactly what it
off
means.
the debt of life?
It
Jesus
also
Christ.
means that all children until they're adults probably are. The tally is kept of every meal and every
Yes,
toy and
every
every
meal,
book
every
for
toy,
school.
clothes,
Yeah,
all of it. And then yeah, when they reach the age of maturity or whatever it is, it's like you're not given a graduation, you're given a bill. You get an
yeah.
invoice. Congrats, you are now officially an adult.
That
Here's your
is
bill.
so that is so Frankie though. I love it. It's
Jesus,
so great.
man,
Oh man. It's so
just
hilarious.
awful,
But
absolutely awful.
it really just is a great little moment though of like, yeah, this whole sci-fi situation of a woman who was, I mean, she volunteered to take the baby from Keiko. So does that mean she owes O'Brien anything in terms of, what she can or can't drink or eat? Does
Well,
Well, the first thing we should say is, we know O'Brien. O'Brien, yes, he's being overbearing on a real
he's
level.
being a bit overprotective, but I would also say that um, I would not to say that he has rights and can tell her what to do per se, but I would say under the guise of erring on the side of caution, she's a Bajoran carrying a human baby that was artificially implanted.
Right,
So there's probably all kinds of concerns and potential complications that they
right,
should be, at least, thinking about on some level. And
right,
who knows how caffeine is going to affect her system. It
right,
might be something that Bajoran babies can handle, but
right,
a human baby implanted into a Bajoran, we don't know. And it's
right,
like you're so close to your due date anyway. You might as well just, not necessarily saying rule it out completely, but just keep it in your mind that hey,
right,
you're not carrying your species inside you. That's
right,
someone else.
right.
It's a whole other culture there
Yeah,
that might have a sensitivity. So yeah,
right. Yeah. Well, it's just funny. I mean, really, the point though is like, do we trust that Kira wants what's best for this baby that she's carrying over O'Brien carrying? I think they both care.
yeah. I mean that's kind of the whole point. It's like she's
Yeah.
not doing anything to endanger. If your biggest concern is she has one or two extra coffee drinks, then clearly she's doing a great job taking care of the kid. And you need to
Right.
relax,
And I don't
So
see babies reaching for the coffee machine every morning with their caffeine addiction, so I
yeah.
think we'll be okay.
All I know is I want Worf to deliver the baby. I think that should be the running joke in all treks wherever Worf is prominently featured. He should have to deliver like one baby. It should be in his rider. And they didn't do it in Picard. They missed an
I was
opportunity to
gonna
have
say, did
somebody.
Picard do it? No,
No, I'm just
no.
saying they missed an opportunity to have somebody somewhere along the way be pregnant and Worf has to deliver the baby. I think that would just be a fantastic joke to have that Michael Dorn is a great midwife. I just do it. So but then our last little tidbit of a story was with Cisco and Odo. They're in Odo comes into Cisco's office, and he's got a bit of a limp. And
Yep.
Cisco's like, heard you had some excitement today. So, he's checking in on Odo, but he also wants to get the story because again,
Right.
he's trying to be distracted from what's going on with Jake. And so we find out that, Quark had suspected some people were cheating at Dabo in the bar. He called in Odo to watch to see if they were cheating, and surprise, surprise, they were. So he moved in to make the arrest. They spotted them and took off running. He was on the top level of the promenade and tried to run down the stairs to get to them, took a flying leap off of the steps, probably somewhere around midway, with the intent to turn into a giant bird of some kind, a condor, he says,
Yep.
and fly across the bar and tackle these guys. Only, as we all know, he is no longer a changeling, so he did
He's
not
solid.
change. Instead, all his solid form flew through the air and smacked down on the ground, causing much embarrassment and clearly the limp. So he
Right.
tells a great story. But what did you think of that little scene between the two of them? Even though it's a short scene.
Oh yeah, it's also great. It's reminding us of Odo's current situation. He's solid right now, though. As their conversation evolves, he says, "You guys aren't as solid as my people say you are." And
Mm.
Sisko's like, "Yeah, we're actually. I think it's Odo who says we're fragile, or does it it's Sisko that say we're fragile?
No,
Who says?
no. Odo says it. Odo says, yeah, yes.
Yeah,
He says, I don't know why we call you solids. Your bodies are so frail and fragile.
right,
And then
exactly.
Cisco picks up on it. He's like, yeah, there's a lot of ways a
To get
solid
hurt."
body could get hurt. Yeah.
And that's what caused him to think about Jake. And then Dax
And
runs
then
in
Dax
and
rushes
says,
in and he's like, that's it. Defiant. Rally.
"Yeah, we should
Let's
have
go.
left 24 hours ago," kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I love that part of that scene too. I mean, like just them talking for a little bit, and then Dax comes in, delivers the news, and he's just, "Let's go, Dax, you're with me. Defiant, we're leaving as soon as it's ready." Like he's out the door.
Yeah.
Just none of the Hammond and Han we would have seen. I feel like if we had Picard in this situation and being like, I'm a Starfleet captain. I can't just take my battleship to go and rescue my son. He would have had to come up with some kind of convoluted reason to take the Enterprise into willingly into a danger zone. The Enterprise is free and clear over here. There's
Yeah.
rescue ships that are
Our
supposedly on the
mission
way,
isn't to
whatever.
go to Gamma Prime
My
or wherever.
mission, yeah, my mission isn't to rescue my son. My mission is to protect the peace. And then
Yeah.
only after various hijinks ensue would the Enterprise have gone to
Yeah.
Agilon Prime. But
Turns out,
Cisco's,
yeah, their
yeah,
main force is preparing on
yeah,
Prime.
their ambassador carrying critical information was waylaid at Agilon Prime. So now I have
Yeah.
a reason to go over there and beam
Yeah.
everybody up or whatever it is. Cisco's like, nope, turn it around. We're
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
We're going.
It actually reminds me real quick. You said beam everybody up. Part of what's happening is the Klingons have disruptors. I'm assuming we've heard of disruptors before, but this is the first time it stands out to me that in wartime there's a faction using something to stop warping capabilities, at least to this
Transporting
extent.
capability.
Transporting, pardon.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, I assume it's happened before. Am I right? We've had that technology before. Is this like just
So
another time,
it's
or
been talked about, but they don't ever give it a particular name. It's just like the enemy has done something to an area to prevent beaming in or out of a precise location. So you can maybe only beam in at this distance and you got to walk the rest of the way in. That seems to be the typical way we see it done. They've got some kind of shielding or whatever which prevents direct beaming. So we have to set down 5 kilometers outside and then walk in or what so that's the line that we hear a lot delivered. This is the first time though that they talk about how it's just kind of like planet wide. There's no
Mhm.
beaming whatsoever.
anywhere?
The
Yeah.
Klingons are yeah the Klingons are jamming your ability to do that entirely. So then Starfleet has opted to use drop ships basically that they're calling hoppers to transport troops, not just to the planet surface, but then it seems like they're also using them to transport them to and fro different locations on the
Right.
planet surface. And the Klingons are enjoying shooting these things down whenever they
Right.
get the chance.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's the first time we ever heard mention of that kind of technology. Because it was normally if they couldn't beam you down, they used a runabout or a shuttle of some type to
Right.
move you. We don't ever see a hopper. We don't know what a hopper is. I'm assuming it's some kind of, you know, very
Giant
basic
grasshopper.
very basic boxy shape that probably has these two giant legs on it
Thrusters.
for landing for yeah,
Oh, right.
thrusters and landing.
Yeah.
That's why they call it a hopper because it looks like it just
Yeah.
kind of bounces up and goes and then
Yeah.
touches down really quickly so that you can
Yeah.
load people off and on and stuff really quick. That's what
And
I
we
was
should mention
imagining.
real quickly that the one guy Jake comes across who's dying, he basically sacrificed himself so his crew could his team could get on a hopper. He
Mhm.
was fighting off some Klingons, but he wasn't able to get on it in order to lay down covering fire. So there was a guy who was a hero. That is part of what Jake's having to deal with. Is there is someone who actually did something heroic and is dying
Yeah.
for it.
And that's
Um,
kind of the and really quick, I just want to say that's an interesting guy because that's the kind of sacrifice that we often hear about on Star Trek, but we never see the end result of. How many times in the episode has it been, someone has to stay behind because it's a dead man switch on whatever. So we
right,
know they're going to die, but we don't see it. The rest of our hero team escapes and then the bomb goes off or
right,
the shield collapses or whatever it is. So we know they succeeded, but we don't
right,
actually see their death. We just know that it happened. This
right,
is the first time that we see the other side of that. He stayed behind. He continued to fight off the Klingons so that his team could get on the hopper and leave. They
right,
left. And now here he is. He's in his final throes here. He's been stabbed, basically gutted. He's holding himself together and he is on his way out. He's
right.
gonna he's gonna die in a matter of minutes. And he does right before Jake's eyes dies.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And yeah, it's important we should mention that because that gives him an example of someone who died heroically and did the right thing, and even gives him a hard time about, you think
What he
that
was expecting, his expectations of death and
well,
nobility and heroism.
the guy says like Jake is trying to give a explanation for his cowardice, like, oh, I must have been meant to come here and save you, and the guy's
Mhm.
like, what the hell do you think you're talking about? Like that's not what happened here. So he gives them a hard time, and that's what causes Jake some shame as well. But it's also an example of what some bravery is supposed to look like, and so that's why it's traumatic for Jake is because he's seeing what he should have done, for example, um, and failing to live up to it. But real quickly, we mentioned runabouts. Which runabout was destroyed in this episode? Do you know the name of this runabout?
Oh, man.
So we go
I
trivia question.
I don't, but, I was trying to look some things up about this episode, and a couple of sites that I normally go to were not working, and so that
Hmm.
was upsetting. So it's it was the runabout that was destroyed for this episode. Give me a second. I'll find it.
Is it the Rio Grande? Is it the this one? Is it that one? See if I can find it too.
Hmm.
The Yangtze King.
Yangtze Kian was one. So we had the Rio Grande, the Yangtze Kiang, and the Ganges were the ones that we first saw in the first season. The Yangtze Kiang was destroyed, replaced by the Orinoco. The Ganges was destroyed and replaced by the Mekong. Um,
Trying to. There's a list on Wikipedia of all of them. Um,
the Rubicon.
oh, it's unknown. According to
No.
Wikipedia, it's unknown. The
Well,
Rubicon.
according to the site that I just found, so the way that it all worked out was that the Rubicon was one that replaced another one that was destroyed in an earlier season. The Rubicon, and that was one they had for a while. Then the Rubicon was destroyed, and its replacement, basically the Rubicon 2, was
This one.
yes.
Okay, because on Wikipedia they say that the Rubicon was presumably destroyed in the episode "The Die Is Cast." And then they say that this one that we had in this episode was an unnamed one. But
Yeah, they don't name it, but they say that according to the way that this would work out, the one that should have been destroyed here was the Rubicon, and then the Rubicon is later because it was technically the Rubicon 2, but the Rubicon 2 is replaced,
right,
and it's replaced eventually by the Yukon, and then we get the Volga and the Shenandoah are the last two. um, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Volga, the Shenandoah, and the Gander are the last three shuttlecraft to be brought to the station before the show ends. So we have not seen those yet. The Volga, the Shenandoah, and the Gander, they're still
right.
on their way at some point. But right now, we're somewhere between however you want to name it, either Yukon and Rubicon,
Okay,
whatever you want to
okay.
call it. Yeah.
It's a fun idea that they're all named after rivers, Earth
Yes.
rivers. It's a great way of like giving them something unique.
So it's a great way to like test your own geography there because I mean now that I know the names of all of them, go and look these rivers up. And like I
Yeah,
know I found a few of them, but I don't know of a river named the Volga, the Gander, the Shenandoah. But if they're all continuing that tradition of being named after um,
important
rivers,
rivers on Earth.
I
Yeah,
will take a look. I will take a look and see.
yeah. Is there one called the Tims? I'm always curious. I guess I haven't checked that
No,
list longer. I
no,
was just thinking, like, what names do I know? The
I would
Tims
know
is the
that.
only river I can
Yeah,
think of that I don't know of.
I would know that, and he seems to have gone. It's Cisco who's naming them. He seems to have
Hmm.
gone for very exotic rivers for the most part,
Right,
or lesser, or let's say exotic, maybe lesser known rivers. Like
right.
we don't have the Colorado. We don't have. I mean, I probably
The
the one that I
Mississippi
was.
isn't one. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Like the Rio Grande was probably the easiest one to remember, and then
right.
all the other ones, way off after that.
And
So
we
yeah,
live in Texas, so it's like part of our,
yeah,
literally a boundary,
yeah.
literally a Texas border is the Rio Grande. So,
Well, final thoughts on Nor the Battle.
yeah, this one is it's a serious episode. It's again focused on Jake, and yeah, it's again I had some serious critiques, but I'm not saying the episode itself is bad. Yeah, so yeah.
Well, I really like this episode. Again, like I said, I like it more now than I did the first time that I watched it several years ago. I think that my appreciation for the growth of the relationship between the Cisco's,
Mm,
is really what brings this one home for me.
yeah,
Just watching. We've said this before. I really enjoy watching their family dynamic. The way that Ben just, he works hard to not just understand his son, but give his son the confidence to speak up about whatever it is that is going on with him and
right,
troubling him, and helps him to work through it. He doesn't
right,
bark orders at his son. He doesn't make demands or anything like that. But he's just like always in that very supportive, very open role, and I really enjoy seeing that between the two of them and watching them move through this progression into adulthood and see how it's going to change both of them. Because now that Jake is a man, he's doing his own thing now. What does this mean for elder Cisco here? How is his life going to change now that he is not so responsible for the upbringing of a young child anymore? So I want to see all of that.
okay. I hadn't thought about that part before. Yeah, like if Jake moves on, Cisco will be a father
Just
without a nest to parent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think we've gone through everything that we need to for this particular episode. Really quick, I
Mhm.
thought that we could talk about The Expanse and doing our first After Dark. I feel like we should go ahead and get on the ball with that now that we are 4 episodes in to
Oh, okay.
into the fifth season. So, how about not next week, but the week after that, which would be the 18th, because today is the 4th. So the 18th, doing our first half of book 5.
Um, well, I imagine I will have been reading the Napoleon book.
Oh, that's right. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
you're fine.
Totally
You're
spaced.
fine. Do you really want to do a halfway through episode? I would think we'd want to wait till we'd finished it before, like we
Well, I
just did
thought
the.
that because we had been doing where we were doing again just kind of like updates. Like we just finished the first part, and then we also would talk about the show where the show is in
In
that, and
comparison.
then right, and then go into the and then do another half and do the same thing.
Why don't we keep it in mind? Because I imagine, well, because my plan was to read Napoleon and then read The Count of Monte Cristo, and those are both very thick books.
Yes, they are.
Um,
Yes, they are.
but I mean, I could postpone The Count of Monte Cristo and or even Napoleon, I guess, if we needed to if I needed to read it and catch up. Um, but let's why don't we wait till next week until we like how far are you right now? Do you feel like you're about halfway?
I'm not halfway yet, but that's why I was going to say next on do the at the after
Give
dark on
yourself
the
a
18th.
deadline.
Yes. Yes, but that's fine. Just kind of as we're sitting here live, letting everybody know that we didn't forget. We are going to
Yeah.
be doing the Expanse
We have
stuff.
to finish. We
So,
have to do 5 books. We have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 5 books to do for the end of the show. We got 3 seasons of
oh
Deep
man,
Space Nine and 5 books to go.
so we got to
So
get on it, man. We got to get on it.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, and that's more me. That's more me than you, because obviously, as we can all see, David is an avid reader. He's just got way more time to do this than I do.
Well,
So,
you're making more
yeah.
money than I am at this point, so maybe you're the one who's actually winning out. Really.
Well, we'll see.
So
Well, all right. Well, we will circle back on the Expanse stuff, but until then, you can find us and follow us anywhere that you happen to do your social medias, and of course, you can listen to us anywhere that you happen to listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. Also, be sure to check in with all of our things that we have on YouTube, where you can watch the live versions of our show or replay the episodes later on in case there's something that we said that you either missed or didn't like, or some combination thereof. And let us know. Feel free to drop a comment somewhere or pass us the line on one of the social media platforms that we're on, and we will respond. I promise. So until next week, guys, take care of yourselves.
thanks, guys.